And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got? Policy and markets, elections, current events. The broadcast master tells us how to win. I said, policy and markets, elections and current events. The broadcast master shows us how to win. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Gonna talk markets, gonna talk politics, great for the generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Got cash money, talking politics, great for generations. Oh,
hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of Jimmy at the Crossroads. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program. Once again, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner on a Washington Examiner Wednesday, making sense out of nonsense. Sometimes you gotta let the intro song breathe. Good to be with you today here on the program. Such a pleasure and a privilege. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Also, follow me on Twitter and, of course, like the Facebook page, Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro, and Jimmy at the Crossroads is the show website for all of our content and so much more. Plus, be sure to follow, like, subscribe, all those good things for our friends at the Washington Examiner on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and, of course, at WashingtonExaminer.com. Great show today. I'm looking forward to debating LA Times columnist Michael Hiltzik on two topics today. One, we will hash out the Republican National Convention so far versus the Democratic National Convention last week, how those went, how they compare, and what their impacts could be. And we will tussle a bit over the United States Postal Service and what the Trump administration has been doing and what we should do about the Postal Service long term. For example, should we, as we talked about on Monday, privatize the USPS? We'll hash it out with LA Times columnist Michael Hiltzik. Today, I want to jump right in to the Republican National Convention discussion with Mike Brest, reporter at the Washington Examiner, because it is Washington Examiner Wednesday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And that means we like to check in with our friends at the Examiner, reporters, commentators, anybody who can really provide insights on what's happening, and there are plenty of folks at the Examiner, including Mike Brest. Mike, welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads, sir. It's so good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So this has been quite a week, I think, for the Republican National Convention. It's been very interesting, particularly given that what we have seen is a very coordinated show, and you have some different components that I've noticed. You have speeches that are in person at a single location where they alternate speakers coming back and forth. You have some pre-cut videos, and then like last night, you had Melania Trump, the First Lady, speak in the Rose Garden with a live audience, which is very different from what the Democrats did for any of their speeches. What's your top line so far on how the Republican National Convention is looking, Mike?
So I think to discuss both last night and then to look at the entire week's sort of events is last night the story was without a doubt Melania Trump's speech. She really, obviously she was sort of the keynote speaker of the night. She sort of tied everything together, all of the different components, as you mentioned, whether it was the naturalization ceremony that President Trump led, whether it was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo speaking. There were a bunch of different topics that Melania Trump sort of all blended together in her live speech that you mentioned. And I think what we've seen is, as you mentioned again, a sort of coordinated rollout of the events that we've seen over the course of 2 days so far, and we'll see again tonight and tomorrow as well.
Since you mentioned Mike Brest, Melania Trump, let's go ahead and please, Mr. Matoush, put in cut 3. And this is just a sample of what Melania Trump had to say last night from the Rose Garden in the first address given by a First Lady at a national convention from the White House. I'm sorry, cut 3? All right, so in terms of the situation with regards to Melania Trump, let's just dive into her topic. I'm not sure if we have the footage here. So in terms of Melania Trump and her speech, what did you make of that?
So I think when you look at everything she addressed, she spoke a lot about sort of coming together. She acknowledged the lives that have been lost over the last couple of months, whether that's coronavirus or sort of what we've seen in the streets, or people who are just sort of not in a good position right now as a result of the coronavirus or the economy, or people who have had businesses destroyed in sort of protest, as well as people who are being affected by natural disasters as we prepare for inclement weather, a hard-hit hurricane to hit the southern part of the country. And so Melania Trump's speech really was trying to acknowledge the what people are going through and to provide empathy from the White House to average, ordinary American citizens.
Once again, Mike Brest, our guest reporter at the Washington Examiner. So Melania Trump really was trying to strike a compassionate tone, talking about issues that were really impacting a lot of Americans. There was a tweet that was put out I found very interesting, if we have that and pick one. This is a reporter over at the New York Times and also a CNN political analyst. And I found this kind of striking, especially given the audience that it was presented for. And pulling it up here so we can take a look at the image. Oh, nope, that's not right. So anyway, it was Elena Plott over at the New York Times said that she's interviewed a whole lot of suburban center-right women who have been on the fence about voting for Trump in November. The First Lady's speech is going to stick, saying on Twitter, "One thing that has struck me in these interviews is that they are often looking for a reason to re-elect Trump. Any data point that helps them feel comfortable doing so, like seeing the First Lady evince some compassion, thus becomes very meaningful." There we go. We have the tweet up there. I found this interesting because of the source. It's coming from a liberal media outlet. It's very critical of President Trump at the New York Times. But also, I know a lot of these Republicans who are sort of center-right, and they are wondering what exactly they're going to do come November, and just looking for some sort of a reason to vote for President Trump, especially suburban Republican women, and perhaps the personal connection with that Melania Trump was trying to bring help with that.
I think you bring up However, it should also be noted that when you look at 3.5 years of President President Trump's policies and some of the statements he's made, whether that's official statements or what he does on social media, a lot of the rhetoric he has used has turned off suburban voters, from what I've heard, and it has also turned off women in the suburbs as well, in particular. And so it will be interesting to see if the RNC and the president himself can help win back some of the voters that his rhetoric may have turned off.
Once again, Mike Brest, reporter at the Washington Examiner, joining us. Let's talk about the dynamics overall of this convention. I found that they were very different, noticeably different from what we've seen in the past with the Democratic National Convention. I mean, already this is new, so it is different from the past because we're talking about a virtual convention. But we did have some of the, like with the First Lady, she was in person with an audience. I'm assuming that's going to be the case for Vice President Pence tonight and President Trump tomorrow night. Yet even most of the speakers who were not in front of a live audience like that didn't phone it in. They were actually present at one location where it seemed like there was a coherent narrative that was going on, which I didn't catch the same vibe from the Democratic Convention last week.
When you look back at the Democratic National Convention last week, you sort of saw a lot of sporadic videos that looks like they were taken in different places and sort of put together, as you mentioned. And so the RNC, I think, has tried to, they noticed sort of the disconfiguration or the discombobulation and has tried to do things to avoid repeating that mistake. And so, as you mentioned, this is sort of a new time. It's a historic time in that we've never had conventions go on during a pandemic, or we haven't in at least in 100 years. And so it's important to remember that that is a way in which both conventions had to do things in an unconventional way, in a way that they had to imagine from scratch. They had to completely plan a new way, a way in which neither had intended. We saw the Democrats try and go to Milwaukee for their event. We saw the president and the RNC try and go to first North Carolina and then to Florida for theirs. And yet, even still, both plans had to be scrapped for a safer way.
Yeah, one thing, too, that I found striking about this compared to the Democratic Convention is, for example, when Kamala Harris and Joe Biden came out and gave their speeches, they had masks on as they were walking out. Nobody was there. None of the speakers have worn masks at the Republican National Convention. Now, of course, the bases are very different in terms of their concerns about the virus. And so the perceptions that they're trying to shape at both of these conventions are different. What do you make of that?
I think you bring up a very good point, because it's all about messaging and tailoring it to the base or to voters. And there's still undecided voters that both bases are trying to sway and bring into their camp. And so, as you mentioned, we saw the Democrats appearing to try and take precautions for the coronavirus and have that be a subliminal message to their constituents or to Democrats to say we are taking this seriously, and as a way to likely try and highlight the contrasting behavior of the RNC, which we're now seeing. They probably were able to anticipate that would happen and decided that they would use that as somewhat of a subliminal message in that they are taking it more seriously. However, we won't be able to know just yet whether or not this messaging was actually effective.
Yeah, most certainly. And something else to note is that President Trump, and you pointed this out, had been in several different circumstances in the last couple of days with other people, with Americans. He had frontline workers from various jobs, from the Postal Service on to nurses and police officers that he was gathered together with. He was gathered together in a room for a discussion with hostages that had been freed because of his administration. We saw the President of the United States with John Ponder, who he pardoned on television at a Republican National Committee, a Republican National Convention. And so the president clearly, I mean, I'm sure that they screened everybody. They did their testing that they need to do for anybody who comes in contact with the President of the United States. But when Joe Biden or any of the others had anybody near them, with the exception of his wife, he was masked. So that was just an interesting thing that I think helps go with the whole narrative that the Republican convention really set a tone that they were trying to deliver throughout. And so far, I think they've done a tremendous success. And everything seems cohesive and coordinated, and they're not emphasizing the mask point. Whereas the Democratic National Convention, which admittedly was the first go at this and Republicans could learn, it didn't seem like there was as much cohesion, especially because you had different venues. Even that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, these speeches, the different venues that they were at for their addresses and so forth, I think made it a little less cohesive.
I think you bring up a good point. And the other point that I would like to add is that the president and the RNC has the benefit of the White House.
Yes.
And so whether or not that is just the space or even resources, however, it's also important that we acknowledge the Hatch Act, which says that government resources from government employees can't be used for election purposes. And so there have been a number of accusations, relatively credible ones, that a number of RNC events have actually violated the Hatch Act. And the Hatch Act is not a legal act, so no one is facing prosecution. However, it is an ethical act. It's an act about keeping politics and keeping sort of winning an election out of governing in particular. And so whether or not that was Melania Trump speaking from the Rose Garden, or President Trump, who will be speaking from the White House as well on Thursday. And we also saw breaking a norm, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who spoke, not only the first Secretary of State to speak at a convention in over 75 years, he also did it on a government-funded trip overseas. He recorded his speech in Jerusalem, Israel. And so norms and benefits that an incumbent has that a challenger like Joe Biden doesn't have access to.
Now, how are the RNC, Republican National Committee, that is, the Trump campaign, and the White House talking about that, some of these breaking of norms? I know you were reporting, Mike Brest, on Peter Navarro, who's a senior advisor at the White House, particularly on trade issues, and he's pretty positive about some of these norm breakers.
Absolutely. So Peter Navarro practically celebrated the fact that they're really allowing the RNC into the White House to show off what they've done and to show off what they could do if they're granted 4 more years by the American people. We also saw earlier today Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, in a conversation with Politico, essentially said that people outside of the Beltway don't really care about Hatch Act violations. However, he did, upon clarification, note that they shouldn't actively trying to do things that are unethical or are breaking the law in any way, shape, or form. However, they are not particularly concerned about backlash per se because, as I mentioned earlier, there are no legal ramifications of doing this. It's all about being ethical norms, what has been done in the past, and what people can continue to do in the future if they abide by it. However, what Donald Trump is doing right now could make it easier for a future president to do similar things and then obviously take it one step further.
Although there's the argument, I think, for most of what President Trump has done, as opposed to maybe the Secretary of State instance, in that they want to keep the president in a more central location because of the virus and the pandemic. It's much more controlled, especially when he's going to bring in guests to the White House rather than going to some other public venue. If he's going to do these things, better to have it contained in the White House, which could at least preclude a little bit of the argument in the future where somebody could say, oh, President Trump did all these things. Well, he could maybe say, well, it was during a pandemic that we did that because we wanted the president to be at the White House for safety precaution reasons.
Absolutely. I think it's a great point to acknowledge how the coronavirus sort of shapes the convention and what they're able to do.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So also there are some other controversies that have been going on with a couple of the speakers in terms of things unrelated to the convention itself that you've been reporting on, Mike Brest, with the Washington Examiner. Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So one of the RNC scheduled speakers, Marianne Mendoza, who is an angel mom, which means her son was a law enforcement officer who was killed in the line of duty by an undocumented American. And so she has become an advocate in the time since her son's death about immigration. And she has been a very big supporter of President Trump. And she's actually also on also acts as a consultant for the We Build the Wall Foundation that we saw a number of members of their board, including Steve Bannon, get arrested last week. And so she's connected with them, but is also does a lot of advocacy in terms of immigration and is a big supporter of the police. Yesterday, her speech was pulled by the RNC after she promoted an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about the Elders of Zion. And this is not, in fact, the first time she's done it. However, she did promote the conspiracy theory back in 2018, I believe it was. And so after she promoted it again earlier this week, the RNC decided to pull that speech. And then another person who was speaking at the RNC who actually did go ahead and speak is Abby Johnson, who was a Planned Parenthood executive and then has since become a pro-life advocate. And in a video that she promoted and published of herself in June, she was speaking about her biracial adopted son and how police would interact with him versus her biologically white children. And the way Abby Johnson phrased it was that she thinks police officers would be quote unquote smart if they were to treat and react, and be more aware of her biracial son, because according to her, Black people are more likely to commit crimes. Thus officers should be more prepared for them to do it. However, a number of people have accused this line of thinking as being racist, given the fact that it supports or goes along the premise that all of those arrests were accurate without acknowledging discrepancies in arrests.
Well, to the point, though, about Abby Johnson in terms of her speech, that was clearly one instance of not too many where the RNC emphasized some more socially conservative perspective. She is featured in the film about her own story called Unplanned. Really has a remarkable story about how she was a clinic director at Planned Parenthood and then ended up quitting after she got to learn more about what's really involved in an abortion. I think she told that story in a powerful way. I don't think that the controversy is picking up the steam too much, but it is important to note that, of course, with all these speakers, there can be different issues that may crop up that are unrelated to the topic of conversation, because she's up there talking about abortion, not, for example, what's going on with the police, yet she's got this issue that can fit within the broader discussion, controversial discussion about policing and race in America right now, Mike.
I think you're absolutely right. I don't think any one of these particular issues could be that detrimental. However, it could show to voters a lack of not being serious or not being focused. It could show that they're allowing too many people into their tent under the umbrella of the RNC without enough vetting. And so that could be something that could end up turning voters away from the RNC if given, for example, Jewish independents who are not happy that an RNC speaker had promoted anti-Semitic conspiracy theories.
Yeah, but they dropped her, which is an important note.
Absolutely.
Is that they ended up dropping Mendoza from the speaker list. That particularly was is an egregious thing, to be sure. One more thing I want to talk with you about, Mike Brest, are some of the videos that they produced at the Republican National Convention. For example, in cut 4 here, this is Catalina Lauf and Madeline Lauf. They're sisters. Catalina Lauf ran for Congress in Illinois, was unsuccessful in a primary, but they were featured in a video which I think really underscores some of the messaging that the Trump campaign is trying to bring about with the Republican National Convention and so forth. And it's just one example of many of where they really were trying to highlight some successes of President Trump's administration and also highlight different people who have benefited from policies under the Trump administration. Take a listen.
Look at my business, Begin Health. As a small startup that is growing and launching, we are constantly trying to innovate. And the big challenge that COVID brought that we just didn't see coming was that just almost everything kind of just shut down. And when you are a small startup and you have limited funding, and the funding is really only to kind of get you to that next milestone, we were really struggling. And so we were able to apply for a PPP loan, which really helped allow us to continue hiring and working and developing our products so that we could ultimately still launch.
It's now more than ever so important to have a president and an administration that understands that small business is the backbone of our economy. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was huge. Manufacturing, deregulation, fair trade. These are things that affected real Americans. We have a champion in the Oval Office who has this business background. He actually understands the need for small businesses like my sisters to survive. We aren't the stereotypical conservative. I mean, we come from Hispanic descent and we're millennial women, and that's not what the media wants.
So that's a little example of some of the personalization that they were going for and the policy successes, in addition to the high-level production values that we saw from video after video, Mike Brest.
Absolutely. I think, if anything, the Trump campaign has shown time and time again, and the RNC, that they're good at marketing and they're good at personalizing their messages. And so this is another example of that, which should be of note that interestingly enough, the people in the video also do sort of take a shot at the media, saying that it's not what the Democrats want in regards to them being Latino and Republican and conservatives. And so that's another interesting message that we've seen time and time again from the RNC and from the Trump campaign and from the president himself.
Yeah, Mike Brest, one thing that was striking to me as well, kind of going off of that point, is the level of diversity. There's this perception that Republicans are the old white man's party, and there really was an emphasis on a variety of different backgrounds that Republicans come from. We just saw Latino women who were millennials there. Daniel Cameron, who is the Attorney General of Kentucky, gave just, I thought, an incredible speech. People are already talking about him as a rising star. He's African-American. He's 34 years old, also a millennial. We saw some variety there that I think Republicans, the Republican Party, and the Trump campaign were recognizing is important, especially because the Democrats were painting this perspective that, look, we're the party that is diverse, that welcomes people of all different backgrounds. And the Republican Party just said last night and the night before, wait a second, hold up. We've got a lot more people in our party than you like to present Democrats in the media.
I think that's another reasonable point. I think it's really hard for whether that's pollsters or people in the media to really get an accurate representation of who is who subscribes to which political party and how to really qualify and quantify it.
Yeah, no, very true. But I think that there is this perception of the Republican Party, and definitely the Republicans last night and the night before were trying to do away with that perception, because there are rock-ribbed Republicans and conservatives who are of all different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and we saw that. We've seen that so far, and I'm sure we're going to see it coming even more.
I would expect the same moving forward.
Mike Brest, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner. So great to check in with you, sir. Thanks for joining us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads once again on Washington Examiner Wednesday.
Thank you for having me, Jimmy.
Thank you. Once again, Mike Brest joining us from the Washington Examiner. It is indeed Washington Examiner Wednesday. And I want to play a clip before we run to a break, because I mentioned Daniel Cameron. And I thought that this was fantastic, and we may play it when we talk with Michael Hiltzik as well, but it's worth seeing twice. In cut one, looks like our computer's frozen. We're just having some gremlins in the system today, but Daniel Cameron was absolutely incredible. I mean, there's a reason why people were already calling him a rising star, somebody who has tremendous potential in the Republican Party, because when he was speaking, he did it so eloquently and so effectively in terms of breaking down, in my view, the Democratic narrative that has been presented over what Republicans should be like and look like, what Democrats should be like and look like, what the parties are about. He brought up Abraham Lincoln in a very forceful ways. He was a tremendously effective speaker, and he's all of 34 years old. He is the epitome of the rising conservative generation of millennials in the United States of America. And I think that we are likely to see this continue moving forward, that you will see more and more younger conservatives, like, for example, Kimberly Klacik, who is running for Congress in Baltimore. She came out with a tremendous ad. And also, When we look at Catalina Louth, who was in that video, I think she's got tremendous potential moving forward, notwithstanding that she was unsuccessful in her primary. These are examples of millennial conservatives from throughout America who are, I think, making tremendous strides and have potential that should not be underestimated. I mean, the Democrats will say, oh, we have the millennial generation on our side. We have minorities in our party. That's who we are. We're the representatives of those groups. The Republicans are not. That is not what's going on here. What we are seeing now, more and more, is a Republican Party that is increasingly diverse and vibrant, and the people who are part of that party, of unexpected backgrounds, are passionate about their views, breaking those stereotypes in ways that show that they are sincere, that they understand, that they appreciate it all. They appreciate what America is all about. So we have that clip now. We are unfrozen, folks. Let's take a listen. Daniel Cameron, who is Attorney General of Kentucky.
So the question is, will we choose the path that gives us the best chance to meet those universal desires? Or will we go backward to a time when people were treated like political commodities who can't be trusted to think for themselves? I think
that's a snippet. I think we'll play more on the other side. We got to run to a break with Michael Hiltzik coming up. He is Los Angeles Times columnist, one of our favorite liberals to come on the program. We're going to talk about the RNC and the DNC, kind of comparing and contrasting somewhat, and then debating the Postal Service and what's going on there. You do not want to miss this. It should be fun. Michael is always a fun sparring partner, so keep it right here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Crikey, that was the biggest bloody mosquito I've ever seen. Wait, coming in. Oh, good day, mate. You know, after a long day of kangarangling and crock roping, a man can really work up an appetite, not to mention a whopper of a backache. I know a place, and that's why I like coming into the Back Out Steakhouse. The Back Out is the only place I know where you can sit down in a lumbar support Baca lounger and enjoy a big juicy bandicoot steak or a thick koala chop served by a licensed chiropractor. And as you partake of your meal, your server will provide you with a spinal manipulation, neck twist, the hip alignment, the full Matilda. One visit to the Back Out Steakhouse and your spirits will return like an Abbo's boomerang. So the next time your back goes on walkabout and you're coincidentally, simultaneously craving a slab of cooked meat, waltz on into the Back Out Steakhouse. You not only feel good down under, but all over. Back Out Steakhouse! Good stuff, eh, Skippy? Bloody boomerangs. Back Out Steakhouse!
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Apologies, folks. Once again, gremlins in the system today, it seems, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Hoping all will work out well now as we continue with Michael Hiltzik, business columnist at the LA Times and author of the brand new book, Iron Empires. Michael, throw it back up on the screen for us, please, if you want to show your book so folks can know exactly what they're looking for. Iron Empires, modeled by the author himself right there. Here as we continue on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Good luck with the book, sir. So let me Let me get back to the Republican National Convention topic, and I appreciate you switching the medium of conversation here on the fly. In terms of the RNC, just going to restate what you were saying before, please.
Well, what I said was I didn't hear much indication of policy statements or prescriptions from the RNC. And in fact, they explicitly said that they weren't going to have a platform this time around beyond re-electing President Trump. And I think I and many other voters would like to hear more than that. So, it doesn't seem worth many people's time to tune into it.
So I would disagree in that I especially heard highlighting of things that had been done in terms of accomplishments that I hadn't heard from the Democratic Party in terms of what they had achieved, what they would like to achieve. I saw some of that in I watched not every minute, but most minutes of the last couple of nights of the Republican National Convention, and I was very struck by how much more policy I felt that there was compared to the Democrats, particularly when they were discussing things like the First Step Act and the economy and the Paycheck Protection Program and other things. Now, they weren't getting into depth. Of course, the convention isn't where you're going to get into the weeds on how a policy works, but I felt that there was noticeable discussion about not only some policy things, especially things that had been done over the course of the last 3 to 4 years to paint a picture of progress and success under Republican leadership. But I also felt that what they were emphasizing was that Republicans really are talking about those sorts of issues, because I heard a good amount, not in every speech and not from every person, but a lot more discussion about policy than I was even expecting.
Well, okay. I don't know what to say to that, except that you heard something I didn't hear.
So, well, you didn't watch as much as the RNC as I did, though. So, but then again, I think you probably would have come away with a similar perspective. That's for sure. In terms of the Democratic convention, though, and the Republican convention, and what message it sends in terms of this political climate right now, in terms of how they're going about it, their messaging, their approach, what their speakers are talking about, the way that they're presenting themselves. I mean, last week, just as one example, we talked about this with Washington Examiner reporter Mike Brest in the last segment. Last week, the Democrats, it seemed like it was more disjointed. They had people all across the country phoning it in with their videos and so forth, versus the Republican convention, where you have had speakers that have alternated at one location, giving some sort of a coherent and cohesive idea. You had some speakers that were sending in video messages, and you had other videos that were interspersed. And then you had the big difference, too, is that you had live audience for Melania Trump last night, the First Lady. I would expect the same thing for Vice President Pence tonight and President Trump tomorrow night. And so I think that there were some noticeable differences there in terms of just the way in which they went about the production, which I found interesting.
Well, all I can say about that is, so what? I mean, we have videos from 50 states in the Democratic convention. We have, a couple of dozen people sitting around in the Rose Garden to listen to Melania Trump. Who cares, really? I mean, none of that really matters. None of that matters to voters. None of that matters to me. I can't imagine why it would matter to you.
Well, I think it would matter to me for two reasons. Number one, when you have a live audience that's able to provide applause for a speaker, that adds a different dynamic than somebody who's just in a room speaking to the audience without a crowd there. This is one of the reasons why I think that you notice big difference just in terms of tone in general when people are not speaking at the massive convention hall. And I was at the RNC in 2016 as an alternate delegate from Colorado, and I think that there is an energy that can come from when you have speaker addressing a live audience. But then also in terms of the production value, I think it actually is very important in this modern day and age when people are watching things on television and expecting sort of a show and a narrative to be presented that's cohesive in programs that they watch on TV. I think if you can capture that for a convention, and I think the RNC has done an effective job at that, I do think that helps in terms of the appeal, in terms of what kind of a message and impression that it sends, especially to voters who are trying to figure out, how still they're going to vote come November or in the next few weeks as ballots start dropping.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
I don't have
okay.
it.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. So just
I don't have any
one
response
final question, just from a historical perspective, because I know you study a lot about American history in terms of these conventions, setting aside the politics and some of the pageantry and so forth of this current occasion, the differences between the DNC and the RNC. What do you make of this moment where we have conventions that are now, from a historical perspective, this year, are remote, that are largely not in front of live audiences, that are not like they have been for many decades here in the United States?
I think clearly this is a response to necessity. You can't bring together, several thousand people in a inside room where everybody is basically breathing in each other's faces right now. I think what it tells you is that a lot of the pageantry, as you put it, in the past was sort of a veneer over necessity. I mean, there wasn't any other way to achieve the nomination process than to have it all happen at once and in one place. So we sort of papered that over or dressed that with balloons and ballyhoo and what have you. We don't need to do that anymore. And I think certainly what the Democratic Convention has shown, and to a much lesser extent the RNC, is that all of that stuff can be dispensed with and replaced by something that's much more meaningful. I think that's what we're moving to. I'd be really surprised if the next conventions 4 years from now don't resemble this year's more than past ones.
It's interesting. See, having been to the RNC once, of Republican National Convention in 2016, as I mentioned, I was an alternate delegate from Colorado. I think one of the benefits of having the massive convention center type event is that you can energize folks in the base from across the country who show up, who become very enthused about what was going on. I mean, that did give me some energy as a voter in 2016 from somebody who, myself, I was opposed to President Trump throughout almost the entire primary.
Well, there's no evidence whatsoever that the conventions have any lasting energizing effect. I mean, we see cycle after cycle, maybe there's a bump, maybe it's a sizable bump, maybe it's a little bump, but within a week or two, it's gone. So
no, let me clarify what I mean. I don't mean the broader public or even the base watching on TV.
Well,
I mean the people who show up at the convention hall and are there with the energy and the engage. I really think that fires people up in a way that can be lasting. Certainly was for me, 2016.
Well, people who go to conventions or who are delegates or just bystanders are already fired up, or they wouldn't make the effort to go to
fair enough
wherever it is. I mean, East, Rabbit Hash, Wisconsin, to go to one of these things. So it's not making a difference. If it doesn't make a difference in the broader voter population, then it doesn't make a difference.
Michael Hiltzik, our guest, business columnist at the Los Angeles Times. Let's shift gears here to a topic that has garnered a great deal of attention, and that would be the United States Postal Service. This is an organization in the federal government that is extraordinarily popular, according to polling, among Americans. We have seen controversies of late because of different reportings about mail sorting machines that have been shut down, that we have seen postal collection boxes removed, things that, by the way, have been going on for years. But one thing that we have seen now that is even more amplified is with mail-in voting, where now you have a situation where states across the country are trying to implement statewide vote-by-mail systems. I'm in Colorado. We're the third state to jump forward with a statewide vote-by-mail beginning in 2014. On the whole, I will say it has worked well in Colorado. We have taken good precautions. We have built up a system that really does work, that has different safeguards that are in place. But as I've said on this program, it took years to build up to that point where we were ready to go ahead and do it and had everything in place, all our ducks in a row. Now you have a lot of states that are rushing to it. And my perception is that Democrats are trying to set up the Postal Service and Louis DeJoy, the Postmaster General, as sort of the fall guys for a vote by mail process this year, trying to say, oh, if we just fund the Postal Service more, then that's going to make sure that these vote by mail systems will go off without a hitch, which I think is in and itself misleading. That's my setup here. But Michael Hiltzik of the LA Times, what do you think's going on here with the Postal Service situation?
Well, first of all, Democrats aren't saying that at all. Nobody is saying that. What they're saying is that basically we want to be sure that the U.S. Postal Service actually is prepared to do the job that we expect it to do, and that, in fact, General DeJoy says they are going to do. Now, that being said, it's not a myth and it's not imagination that since DeJoy came into place, mail has been slowed down, or it has slowed down. This is, we have official records from the U.S. Postal Service documenting that. And that's not only that, but obviously we have anecdotal reports and solid reporting, including from my colleagues here in LA who've been inside the postal distribution centers and have seen chaos. This is chaos that happened in the last couple of months. Now, the bottom line is, look, DeJoy, he appeared before Congress twice in the last week. I think in both cases, he put in a uniquely pathetic performance in which he showed that he doesn't really understand the Postal Service. He doesn't understand his job, and yet he bowled ahead and implemented changes in operations without, first of all, without doing any sort of research to determine what effect they would have on various constituencies that depend on the Postal Service. And then he claimed that he didn't really know that this was going on, which is, first of all, either he's lying or he's just confessing to incompetence. Now, we have testimony from a former vice chairman of the Postal Board of Governors that said they had considered and, quite properly, a lot of the initiatives that have been taken in the last couple of months to try to make the Postal Service more efficient. And they decided affirmatively to put them on hold until the pandemic was over and until after the election, when there's going to be a unique strain on postal operations. And we have a unique strain on postal operations from the pandemic. It's only going to get more burdensome in the next few months. And the Postal Board of Governors said, let's hold off on that until the smoke clears. And then DeJoy came in and he went ahead and did it without actually, according to his own testimony, going back to the Board of Governors and saying, are you okay with this? And should we go ahead and do it? Why would you undertake dramatic steps and changes in operations of an organization just at the point where the effect on the service is unknown and unpredictable? Why would you do that as a CEO of a corporation? Why would you basically shake up a corporation at the point when it's facing unique?
Okay, so a few things. You said a lot there. First of all, I know that the Democrats haven't literally said, oh, the USPS is going to be our fall guy, but here's the thing. Democrats have been overemphasizing, and I will concede that President Trump has been doing the overemphasizing the opposite in terms of risks of vote by mail and rush in generally, broadly speaking. But in terms of the Democrats, they have been setting up this idea that vote by mail is resoundingly effective. It's going to be resoundingly effective in any state that tries it statewide. And I just, based on Colorado's experience, which has been very successful, but built on years of getting there, I think that is a woefully overestimate of what is actually the case with vote by mail. But let me finish my point here, because what I'm looking at here is the Democrats overemphasizing this idea of vote by mail working no matter what. and trying to say that, oh my gosh, it is the Postal Service. We need $25 billion to go to the Postal Service, and then they'll be able to do their job when Postmaster DeJoy says we have enough cash on hand to get us through this election cycle and to handle the mail-in ballots as we've got it. And I believe that they do, especially based on Colorado's own experiences. But also, in terms of the vote-by-mail system, there are a lot of problems when you're rushing it into place. And as the Democrats want, you do not include signature verification, which is absolutely critical and has been a boon for Colorado voters to feel trust and confidence in the electoral process here in this state when it comes to vote by mail. They don't want that in the Democrat House bill in terms of what they would actually strip away any of these sorts of requirements for signature verification that states may want to or rightly have in place already. But what they're doing is basically saying, oh, vote by mail is great. If we just fund the post office, then things will be hunky-dory and 100%. That is false. It is up to the state, local election officials to manage their elections predominantly here. It is not the Postal Service that is the driver. Even in terms of vote by mail, you need to have the systems and processes and safeguards in place.
All right. Look, first of all, it's simply incorrect that Democrats have said vote by mail is a slam dunk or that it's going to be perfect.
That is absolutely the perception that's been given. No doubt.
Well, I don't care what the perception is. The fact is that Democrats haven't said that. What they have said is that it's important to do and that it is going to be a challenge. And to help deal with that challenge, we need to have the Postal Service on board. They haven't said, the Postal Service is interfering. They haven't said that the Postal Service is going to screw it up. What they've said is that it's going to be a complicated process in many states, and we need everybody to pull together.
No,
we
they've been understating
that. The Postal Service certainly don't need the Postal Service to be remaking itself on the bump when it needs to be helping. Now, we also have official remarks from the U.S. Postal Service, from DeJoy's team, that says, despite tradition and practice, which says that election mail gets priority as first-class mail, whether it carries first-class stamps or not, we have the Postal Service saying, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to require that election mail actually have paid first-class stamps. That's going to triple the cost of getting postal mail out, election mail out for many states, and that looks like interference. And I don't know how you can deny that when you go from 20 cents a piece to 55 cents a piece.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute.
That's a problem.
So let me just jump in on that particular point, because I think it's a very important one that you're raising, Michael Hiltzik, again, our guest from the Los Angeles Times. So last November here in Colorado, I'm an Arapahoe County voter in the city of Aurora. Aurora's mayoral race was held up for several days in terms of getting a final decision, particularly because there were, in the case of Aurora, there were a total of 828 ballots between Denver and Arapahoe counties that were replacement ballots that arrived on Election Day. This is November of 2019. And in terms of this Aurora, Colorado election, there were 650 or so ballots that were specifically for Aurora under the auspices of the Arapahoe County clerk and recorder, Joan Lopez. And one thing that happened here in that situation is that she did not plan ahead in terms of making sure that in order to get these replacement ballots in on time, they paid first-class postage. It was something they still managed to get it there because the Postal Service said, we need to make sure at a certain point it was recognized, hey, got to get there on Election Day. Let's make that happen. But what they said is that they have always been advising that you make sure that you take those steps to guarantee quicker delivery. The Postal Service should have gotten the request for first-class mail In that instance, it was not a flub of the post office itself. They managed to actually get it there on election day, but they didn't pay for first-class postage, and they also didn't monitor those ballots, make sure that there was that they were tracking those ballots, so they would have been able to flag if there was an issue. My point is that was 2019, an off-year election, an odd-year election, and it was in a state where we have seen vote by mail work overall very well. And it shows that if a local official is not taking the steps themselves to ensure that ballots get there in a timely fashion, that can be a particular holdup. That has not always been the case, that the post office is just going to make sure that it gets there treated as first-class mail if you don't take the additional steps.
Well,
there's no guarantee. There's never been that guarantee.
That happens to be incorrect. The fact is that we have a report from the Postal Service Office of the Inspector General that was issued late last year, in which the OIG looked at what the record was in the last election and in elections before that. And the Inspector General said it is the practice of the Postal Service to treat all election mail as though it's first-class mail, no matter what class it's paid for. That's been the practice. And if that's now going to be different, that's a change, and it's going to be an expensive change, and it's going to hurt the process. So look, we have the Postal Service itself says, no, this is the way we've done it in the past. We've treated all election mail, ballot mail, as first-class mail, no matter what is being paid for. So, and in any case, this episode that you're referring to underscores that, yes, it's going to be challenging and it's complex, even as you said, in a state that's been doing vote by mail for many years.
Mm-hmm.
So we need everybody to pull together, and we don't need a postal service that's in operational and managerial chaos to be part of this process.
Well, one thing that's important, though, is that, yes, it is a general practice, but that is not always guaranteed. And that's why it is up to election officials locally to make sure that they are taking the appropriate steps. It has never been absolutely a guarantee, which is why we have had these sorts of delays on occasion. Sure, fair enough. But at the same time, what it shows is that there are a lot of different components to a vote by mail system. And why are the Democrats have been emphasizing consistently, let's give $25 billion to Postal Service, which they do not need at this moment in terms of cash on hand. They have it. One thing that Postmaster DeJoy made a point of saying is that we do have enough cash on hand to make sure that things happen the way they need to in terms of the election day. But when you're emphasizing the Postal Service funding as the issue, they have presented it, clearly been presenting. We've talked about and documented in this program as a sort of panacea. They may not say that phrase or use that type of language, but that is clearly what they're implying. But I do want to go back to the trends in history in terms of the Postal Service timeliness and so forth. Let's put up pick one here. This is the Washington Post last week on the 19th. And they said that this summer's mail woes appear to be only slightly worse than they were last year, and the delivery may be more related to the coronavirus pandemic. And delivery woes were worse in the first part of 2020, just as the pandemic hit, than during the summer when compared with the same periods last year, which I think is an important distinction. Then let's also talk about the Postal Service in terms of the mailboxes that have been removed, and also in terms of the mail sorting equipment that's been removed. Let's put up here a pick three. Pick three. This is the Postal Service. A report on the Postal Service, 2015, August 26. Oh my gosh, 5 years ago today, Michael Hiltzik. Amid a significant downsizing of the money-strapped U.S. Postal Service, the number of letters arriving late has jumped by almost 50% since the start of the year. The delays have become so serious that the Postal Service's watchdog issued an urgent alert earlier this month recommending that postal officials put all further closures of mail sorting plants on hold, until service stabilizes, which, by the way, DeJoy is now doing. You put up pick four. First-class mail has gradually been traveling more slowly since the post office started closing dozens of mail sorting plants in 2012. These longer delivery times became the new normal. My point in bringing this up is that the mail sorting removal of these mail sorting units these machines is not something new. It happened under Barack Obama. We had repeated delays under Barack Obama. Now, it was not him overseeing it. I'm just saying it was during his presidency. The president isn't the one who appoints the postmaster general. But this kind of thing has been happening under previous presidents, including Barack Obama, and there wasn't a peep.
Yeah, let me just break it to you. The president doesn't directly appoint the postmaster general, but the president has appointed every single sitting member of the Postal Service Board of
Four Republicans, 2 Democrats.
Majority of the Postal Oversight Commission. And as we know, because we've heard it from members of the Board of Governors, Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, has called in Republican members of the Board of Governors for conversations. All right. So let's not pretend that this doesn't have, that DeJoy's appointment doesn't have Trump's fingerprints on it, because it does. Now, to go back to the points that you raised by putting,
you can't prove that,
those articles up on the screen. Yes, sure. There have been inefficiencies. There have been crises in mail delivery in the past, and every one of those posts that you put up shows that the remedy was to halt changes in postal sorting facilities and to restore closures in postal sorting facilities when they were part of the problem. So why hasn't DeJoy learned the lesson from that? And since we now know from Postal Service statistics that there was a slowdown in delivery starting when he took over, why does he sit there before Congress and when he's asked, are you going to restore the changes that you made? Are you going to put the machines back? Are you going to reopen post office hours? Are you going to reopen postal sorting facilities? He says, no, I don't have to. There's no need. When obviously there is a need. And documents that you just put up on the screen document.
No, what they document are 2 things. Number one, why it was reasonable to halt it at this point, to halt the expansion. Doesn't mean that you have to pick them back up. It also doesn't mean that what in terms of the slowdowns that have happened in the last couple of months, that they are specifically and solely because of that, the mail sorting machine removals, which have been going on for years, including recently, and that's one point.
Yeah,
Point number two, in terms of DeJoy and his appointment and Steve Mnuchin, should the Treasury Secretary be getting involved? No, I don't think he should be having conversations along these lines personally. But there's no demonstration or proof that what Mnuchin said was you have to go ahead and appoint Louis DeJoy specifically as the Postmaster General, and here specifically are the things that are going to happen. What it seems to me that he's doing, based on reading articles that you've written, Michael Hiltzik, is that what Steve Mnuchin is looking at is trying to figure out a basis to say, stop giving Amazon a break. Stop giving Amazon these sorts of benefits, which I completely disagree with him on, but that's what this is about for him. That's nothing else.
What we know from an internal investigation by the U.S. Postal Service, an internal investigation, Amazon does not get a break, doesn't get a break that isn't warranted. It gets a break as a bulk shipper like all other bulk shippers.
I agree.
And as for Mnuchin's concerns or his involvement, he has no legitimate involvement whatsoever. The USPS is an independent agency of the federal government. It does not report to the Treasury Secretary or the Treasury Department.
I agree with you.
He has no right to stick his fingers in there whatsoever. And if he doesn't, then what the hell is he doing calling these people in? If he's not going to do anything about it or has no legitimate reason, is this so that he's got pillow talk with his wife and he can say, hey, here's what here's what a Postal Service governor told me? No, he calls them in and he has discussions with them because he wants to communicate Trump administration policy to them, and that's utterly, completely improper.
What he's trying to do more than anything is get additional information, including about Amazon. I think it's about Amazon, which it shouldn't be. So let me just say, I agree with you, Michael Hiltzik. I agree with you that the Treasury Secretary should not be getting involved in these ways. I agree with you that Amazon is doing nothing wrong. The post office is doing nothing wrong vis-a-vis Amazon. For the last couple of years, I've criticized President Trump for his criticisms of the Amazon deal with the United States Postal Service. But at the same time, my sense has been that that's what Mnuchin wants more than anything in terms of these conversations has been information in a variety of different capacities. He was trying to get Congress to enable him to have more authority, but he didn't have authority.
He has no right to that information in any capacity that he serves. He has no right to it, and it's utterly improper and illegal for him either to be involved.
So let me go to a couple of quotes. Let's go back to the Postal Service, though, the mail sorting machines and this trend over 2020. I'm going to quote, as the Wall Street Journal editorial board does, from a recent editorial, quoting Mike Plunkett, a recent USPS executive, now leads the Association for Postal Commerce. You can find valid operational reasons for the actions taken by the Postal Service so far. In no way do I detect any criminality behind them, and I'm at a loss as to how one would reach that conclusion. Remember, criminal investigation was being looked into by Democrats in the House of Representatives into Louis DeJoy. Also, Hamilton Davis, the president of the American Catalog Mailers Association, says, quote, they've been taking machines out of service for years now, and I've been encouraging them to do it more aggressively. I think that's a good thing for America because we don't want to pay for stuff that we don't need. Now, I would agree, and by the way, they've removed 12,000 collection boxes in the last 5 years. I agree that at this point they need to stop because of the election and the perceptions and the concerns that we're seeing. But in the long term, this has been a trend, and I think an appropriate trend in terms of cost-cutting measures.
Yes, and the Board of Governors decided affirmatively that they were going to put that trend on hold until DeJoy came in and he re-implemented it. So, and
what do you explain the May 15th equipment reduction report that was already planned ahead in May 15th, a month before he took office?
I'm sorry.
The U.S. Postal Service, I'm looking at it here right now on my computer. So equipment reduction, May 15th, 2020, going through their specific plans for reduction in the coming months as of May 15th, before he took office.
Yeah, and then he took office and he had
the plan was to move forward with
authority he needed to put that on hold. And by the way, May 15th was after he was actually appointed, though before he took
right before he took office, though. Yeah, but still before he took office. My point is that this was something that was in motion. But Michael Hiltzik, let's talk about the future of the post office for just a moment. In terms of where we go from here, last year the post office had $8.8 billion in a shortfall. $4.5 billion nearly of that was in overtime and tardiness and different things along those lines. And this is a trend that has been going on for years and years. We've seen very little occasions where the post office has had net profits in decades. Over the decades, we've seen very little of that. Now, one thing that's keeping them afloat a bit are the packages, what they've been doing in terms of, this is one of the things that I think, going back to the point about Amazon, I think it's been a good thing that they've shifted more into packaging and giving bulk arrangements to companies like Amazon and so forth. But the reality is that the United States Postal Service has consistently been unsustainable in terms of its financial pathway. What do you think needs to be done for the future, more than just a $25 billion bailout?
All right, a couple of things. One thing that you didn't mention is the 2006 congressional law that said that they have to pre-fund their healthcare costs for their retirees. This is a burden that no other federal agency, and in fact, no corporation actually faces. And as we know, because we've seen the numbers, if that mandate didn't exist, the Postal Service would be in the black for every one of the last 6 years. Number two, you sort of skip over a basic principle, which is, why should the post office or Postal Service be turning a profit? Who says? The fact is that this is, it's a national service, it's a public service. It should cost what it costs to do. And if you wanted to turn a profit, then that means that sending a birthday card to your grandmother from Aurora, Colorado to wherever she lives, whether it's Sitka, Alaska, or New York City or Chicago or Denver won't cost 55 cents. It'll cost at least $5.15 or maybe $7, because that's what the private postal services charge to do this. And they charge by the mile.
Hold on.
Right.
Now, I'm going to stop you right there. I want to stop you right there because, first of all, you can look at Germany. You can look at the Netherlands. You can look at New Zealand. These are instances where they have partially or wholly privatized their postal service, and they are not outrageously expensive, number one. Number two, you know full well that the FedEx and UPS companies are not able to do first-class mail. They can only do the extremely urgent type of mail, for example, because of the change made in 1979. The United States Postal Service has a monopoly. So if you want to not go to the Postal Service for something because you want to get rush delivered through FedEx or UPS, what do? Well, you pay more in order to get that particular service. So, of course, that might be more expensive, but there is no evidence when you look at those countries around the globe, for example, in Europe, the so-called socialist utopias in Europe, where they have done this type of privatization, where it has been outrageously expensive and has failed to meet a universal mail mandate.
Well, look, Germany, which you point to, I don't know what the exact comparison is, but I think in terms of its borders, it's probably about, if it's as big as Texas or maybe Alaska, that's a lot. It's not like the United States. And if you are sending a piece of mail from Berlin to London, it's going to cost you more than it costs you to send it from Berlin to Bonn. That's fundamental.
Look, it's not like one person's mailing. You would have millions of people that would be engaging in this, where you could cover the cost because more people are going to be using that service.
You are going to pay more to send a first-class piece of mail from where you are to anywhere else in the United States than you pay now, and you are going to pay based on distance. That's what, and in fact, this is not guesswork. That's what, when the Trump administration put out a report through its Office of Management and Budget in 2017 saying we should privatize the U.S. Postal Service, they said this was why.
They did not actually suggest privatizing in that report.
More for its basic services. All right. So if that's what you want, then sure, privatize the Postal Service, but you're not going to like the results, I guarantee you.
In 2018, the commission put together in the Trump administration did not actually suggest privatization, Michael Hiltzik. It came short of suggesting privatization of the U.S. Postal Service. What?
The Office of Management and Budget put out a report. They not only the Postal Service, but dozens of federal agencies that they recommended privatization, and they explicitly said we should privatize the Postal Service so that it can charge flexibly.
The 2018, I looked at that. The 2018 report from the Postal Commission did not suggest or recommend. The task force put together did not suggest privatization, Michael. It did not suggest privatization. There may be certain elements that have suggested that, but not nearly enough. I think we should go. Let's put up the pic. I think we should be listening to Jared Polis, governor of Colorado, in 2001. Wrote a paper for the Independence Institute entitled Privatizing and Eliminating the Monopoly of the United States Postal Service. And he's been an advocate of this now, fairly quietly, but an advocate of this going back 19 years. And he talks a lot about some of these advantages and looks at in his paper, he looks at the dynamics of the Postal Service and of providing mail services of various kinds, and looks at the monopolies and the power and authority of the U.S. Postal Service, and strongly recommends both demonopolization and privatization to put it on the kind of financial pathway that it needs to be, and also to be more effective. And points then in that paper, again, Democratic, now governor of Colorado, former congressman of Colorado, Jared Polis, points out that when you do look at those other European countries, citing them as examples, they are instances where privatization has worked well and effectively. And while you can talk about some of the issues of being across the country, being a much larger country than the Netherlands or than Germany or New Zealand, absolutely, I will grant that. In terms of scale, you can make this kind of thing work. They do this effectively in terms of FedEx and UPS. Now, yes, those services can be more expensive as they are than what the post office provides because we're excluding first-class mail. But when you look at the ability to provide service cost effectively, it absolutely can be done.
All right, let me just
I would like to see the Trump administration talk more about privatization, Michael Hiltzik.
All right,
I think that they are woefully inadequate in that regard.
All right, I've got on my screen the reform plan from the Office of Management and Budget of the Trump administration. This was issued on, let's see, in 2017, all right? And I'm going to page 68 here, okay? Because I want to make sure I've got it right. And here's what it says about the Postal Service. This is under the headline, The Opportunity. And what it says is, a privatized postal service would have a substantially lower cost structure, be able to adapt to changing customer needs, and make business decisions free from political interference, and have access to private capital markets. This proposal would restructure USPS by aligning revenues and expenses to restore a sustainable business model and prepare for conversion from a government agency into a privately held corporation.
So we're talking about two different entities then, because I'm talking about the Treasury Department's report from the task force on the United States Postal System, December 2018. December 2018.
This came directly from the Trump White House after he took over, and it directly says explicitly, restructure the Postal Service and privatize it.
Well, I'm encouraged by that personally, but I was looking at the actual task force on the United States Postal System that was created specifically to look at this. So what I'm saying is, in terms of their actual task force that was created for the purpose of exploring reforms for the Postal Service, they fell short of calling for privatization. But thank you for telling me about the OMB report. I'm encouraged by that. I would like to see more direction in that regard after this election cycle in terms of that. But just finally, Michael, when we look at the role of the U.S. government at this point in time in terms of services, in terms of what's provided, we have seen that the number of employees in the United States Postal Service has dramatically decreased by nearly 200,000, 300,000, 250,000, somewhere around there in terms of the workforce over the course of the last 2 decades. We have seen that the number of first-class mail pieces that get put in the mail dramatically lower than what we had seen going into the 21st century. You talk about the 2006 healthcare or the provision in terms of pensions where they have to pre-fund their pensions, which, by the way, I think every federal government agency should be looking at something like that. Every state agency, too, because we have all these massively unfunded liabilities. But let's put one thing into perspective. The Postal Service offers something that you don't see, certainly not in the private sector, which is healthcare benefits for retirees. And that is something that we know how healthcare costs are in the United States of America. They're astronomical. It is certainly justified to say that an agency of the government should be looking at pre-fund if they're providing something like this. The solution isn't to provide some sort of a bailout or to eliminate the pre-funding mandate. If you're not going to privatize the post office, what you should do is you should go ahead and get rid of or start phasing out for upcoming new workers that particular provision on the healthcare in terms of the healthcare benefits. But also, they haven't paid into that system since 2012, as you know. So how do you say that these losses are attributable? When we know about first-class mail, we know that $4.5 billion was spent on overtime and late mailings and so forth in last year. How do you say that that is the driver of the cost situation here with the Postal Service?
Well, because it is. It's not that they have to pay these costs. It's that they had to accelerate the payment of those costs into a period of about 10 years, rather than amortizing them as
they stopped in 2012.
The way other federal agencies and private corporations do. So this was And in fact, it was probably deliberate, but it certainly put a unique burden on the U.S. Postal Service's budget. And by the way, DeJoy, in his testimony before the Senate, endorsed repealing that provision. So he's with me, not with you.
Okay, fair enough. I think the provision that should be repealed is providing health benefits for new workers that come into the system. I think you should start there. Now, that doesn't help with some of the liabilities you have on the books.
Postal Service workers don't deserve to have health coverage?
No, I'm talking about retirees. You don't see that in the private sector. You don't see that in the private sector.
Yes,
it's very rare. It's very rare nowadays in terms of retirees getting health care benefits in the private sector. So no, I don't think future postal employees should get that kind of benefit.
Why not?
Because when you are leaving, especially when it's not happening in the private sector, you shouldn't be given benefits after you retire that are healthcare benefits. A pension, fine, if you can maintain a pension, that's all well and good. Because your previous employer should not, especially if it's a government agency, government-tied enterprise, should not be providing healthcare benefits for you. You should be responsible for that after you retire or go on to Medicare.
Why not? You serve an employer for 30 or 40 years, and you should be cut loose after you retire? What is that?
In terms of health care, you should be encouraging workers to stay within their own lane in terms of providing themselves. If they're going to retire early, they should be, especially if they were government employees, they should be providing. They should. They should be.
It's for all retirees.
Well, but if you get out later,
you're going to leave them uncovered, really?
In terms of providing for your own health care, most people in the private sector nowadays do not have employers who are providing that. The government shouldn't.
Why?
Because they should. Literally, it is not the role of government to be providing people all of these sorts of benefits after they leave their jobs, especially that are not provided in the private sector, or rarely are.
Why?
Because it's not the role of government. I'm telling you. It's not the role of government to provide health care benefits to retirees.
It's the role of
when they're working for you, yes. Fulfill promises. Existing employees who retire,
these were promises.
They absolutely, existing employees, make sure to fulfill those. New employees that are coming in, you need to start phasing out these kinds of programs.
Well, we're not talking,
the government.
You know, this rule on pre-amortizing retiree health care is not about new employees or it's about existing retirees and existing employees.
True.
This was promise made, and you seem to be saying we should abrogate that promise.
No, you're making a very important distinction, Michael, and I've tried to include that in there. That I'm talking about future retirees. I'm not talking about, and so yes, you do have an existing challenge on the books.
Future retirees include a lot of people who are working for the Postal Service today and have accumulated 20, 30, 40 years of service.
Yes.
And they were hired according to
I agree.
They were offered this promise at the time.
Yes. So I agree. I'm looking at new workers that come in. You're right. I need to be very cogent with my language there. So absolutely. It's important clarification. And then it still leaves us with all of these liabilities that are owed. And you still have the pre-funding that I said, because there are a lot of workers who are current workers who will be working in the Postal Service for many years. So I see your point there. But here's the thing. I don't think that because Louis DeJoy, Postmaster General, Michael Hiltzik, has said that he thinks we should get rid of this necessarily means that we should. I'm not saying that he's right in everything. I'm not saying that I agree that he should be agreeing with you on that particular point. I think that this is a government agency. Sure, it is quasi-governmental, but it is still nonetheless, it has a heck of a lot of authority, and they don't have to pay taxes for the most part. They can avoid, for the most part. But what I think here, in regards to the role of this 2006 statute, is that it is being overstated, especially because payments have not been made since 2012 in accordance with that 2006 statute, that you are overstating its role in the financial state of the Postal Service. It is first-class mail primarily, and also these excessive costs like the $4.5 billion I was talking about.
Jimmy, you misunderstand the impact. Whether they're paying it, as they should or not, the fact is that the cost of it accrues as a charge against revenue. So it shows up in the bottom line of the U.S. Postal Service. And what DeJoy said was basically he acknowledged that that is a cause of the Postal Service deficit and that he wants that removed.
Certainly contributing factor.
And it's not a mystery. It's in black and white, and it's 2 + 2 = 4, is that this particular burden and this obligation accounts for why the U.S. Postal Service has run a deficit in the last 6 years.
It is a contributing factor into as DeJoy pointed out. There are a number of reasons for why the Postal Service has had its problems over these years, and we know that especially when you're talking about, you look at the significant decline in first-class mail postage that has been used. But Michael Hiltzik, we have to run here. We've been at this for an hour. I really appreciate it. You are always fun to dive into topics with. Of course, columnist at the LA Times. Show that book one more time. Iron Empire's new book just came out from Michael Hiltzik of the Los Angeles Times. You're on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Michael, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you show your book one more time? Want to give a chance to show the Iron Empire one more time. I appreciate it, my friend. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Check it out, the book Iron Empires and his columns for the Los Angeles Times. Michael Hiltzik joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads for one of our longest segments that we have done here on this program. And we are out of time today. So great to be with you. Such a pleasure and a privilege. What a vibrant discussion. Got to enjoy it, to be sure. That is it for us today. We will be back Friday for Free to Choose Friday here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Be sure to tune in then. My thanks to Mike Brest of the Washington Examiner for joining us, Michael Hiltzik of the Los Angeles Times, Nathan Matoush working the Matoush magic as producer extraordinaire once again today, the Washington Examiner, our partners, and to you for liking, subscribing, all those good things. Be sure to tune in next time. And may God bless America.